race car for the Indiana 500 race in Indianapolis. And so on the side of this beautiful white, I think it was a real sporty car, and it said Pace Car 500. And so we went up together, and so we just have company. So we drove back, and so on the way down we stopped at one place for overnight because we drove back, and so they were having a big parade the next day. So we had to stay overnight and for the next day, and be in the parade with this car. No, we couldn't, but we went. We were coming down, and so there's a young fellow there, and he said, "Man, a lot of where you get there, they didn't expect to see two little old ladies in this car." And so anyway, there's a place down the road a little ways that they always pick up, especially poor cars. Be real careful when you go through that area and stay underneath the speed limit. He said, "Are you picked up?" We stayed under the speed limit, and it was fun. We just drove so many beautiful.
So most of the time you were driving just ordinary cars, like back and forth from the airport. Company. And the way that you make the most money is to make all the connections so when another pick up to go to another place.
Yeah. So when we'd go to San Diego, we'd take cars to say Los Angeles International Airport, and we would drive those down and drop them off to budget in LAX or eyes, and we'd bring them back and back just to LAX. And we'd drop those off, and then we would pick up another car that belonged to guys drive it home. So it worked out really well.
So then when you had to go to your car that you could take and didn't have to worry about parking it or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So we would go over, and usually what we'd do, we'd bring a car home the night before from bed, and then we'd use it to go down. It was an LAX car, and we'd use it to take down to drop off to together. And then we'd catch on the budget bus that would take to the airport where we had. When we'd get home from our trip, we'd pick up a Van Nuys car and drive it back home, so to and from the airport. But it would cost. We'd make money as we trips. But it worked out. It worked out very well.
So when you were, how many people would you have driving every day?
Well, sometimes 6 because cars had a bunch bit, and so you could only. We had more cars. Like when we went to San Diego, there would be two cars down there, and then there might be even 12 other cars back. And
did that for how long?
Well, we started working when most people would be 55. I started to work, and I worked for 20 years, from 55 to 75 years. And luckily, I really didn't have to work, but I love to work. And so the money that I earned, I had 14 grandchildren. And so I had a separate account for each one of them, a separate bank book. And I would put money in. And because of that, I was able to get enough money in all 14 of the funds, completely paid for their mission. And then I started what I called an education. And it ended up that each of those education funds had nearly $23,000 in them. When they would go to college, and luckily their parents paid for their college education, and so far, there's been 8 children that have used that money as a down payment. They had homes that they otherwise more than likely could have at this age, maybe for a long time. And then for all the girls, I bought each one of them a set of sirloin, each of my 6 granddaughters. And then for my 14 grandchildren, I also got a 1-ounce coin. And at the time, I paid $424 for each coin. Well, as they get married, I give each one of them one of these gold coins. And great. So it's been a big satisfaction for me to be able to see these children, grandsons, well, more than that. There were Bill's 3 sons. None of Nanny's children ever went on missions, but they got money. And all the girls, even though none of the girls have gone on their missions. But Bill's 2 boys went on missions, for their mission money. And so as I said, I just loved it. And it was hard work because every morning I'd have to leave home at 7 o'clock and I'd get home maybe 4:30, 5. And you got paid for how many trips you made. You didn't get paid by that for the trips. And so they can and put this money in their accounts. And luckily at that time, they were really interested on money. They were paying 8. In fact, for a few years they were paying 10 and 5 interest. And compound interest, this helped this money grow. And so, in their birthdays, I would get each grandchild $200, and that would in their house. So it worked out really well. And so, like I said, it's really given me a lot of affection to all my grandkids. And so besides working hard and fun, and then this time, I also helped on the apartments when we would have a vacancy. I would do the stoves and cleaning the windows and scrubbing the floors, and I worked hard, but I'm not complaining. I'm just glad that I was able to do it, and I do like work. And besides that, I kept up the house. I did the cleaning, the cooking, everything. But luckily I had good health, and that made a difference. And like I said, I just enjoyed working, and it was fun. It got me out, and I got to see the country, see how Los Angeles was growing, and
you knew how to get to everywhere in town.
I took everybody in town together and how to do it, and what to do. And this one time it was really funny. Self and I went down. We went down to pick up really, really sports cars. In fact, most of these that we had on the side were really. Most of them were sport cars. They were the really top of the line, flashy cars. So we got down to this one place. Excuse me. And this lady that was giving us the car said, "Oh, you drive the cars for 6 shifts." We said, "Lady, we learned on 6 shifts." They didn't have hill holders and automatic. I said, "You had to shift. Down shift and up shift and everything else shift." She says, "Oh, really?" Because so many people, young people today, I mean, they have no idea how to drive a stick shift because they never come in contact with this people. So, and about the prettiest car that we not the prettiest, but the most fun car, we went down to San Diego to pick up this Corvette, bright lipstick red Corvette, and it was 6 on the floor, not 5, 6 on the floor. It had 2 ignitions, and it was a prototype car. So we had picked it up in San Diego, and then we were taken to the track over in Arizona. So anyway, we picked it up at this doctor's house that had been using this car. He had put the brake on so hard we just nearly killed ourselves trying to get that brake off, and we finally got off it. So we were exhausted when we started our trip to Arizona. Anyway, so we're cruising along out in the desert, absolutely nowhere. It was just open space. But there were 3 of us cars together, and we were the last car, so we were all just going along together. And we weren't really speeding that much. We were just, I imagine, maybe going 5 miles over the speed limit. So I can't imagine where this police car came from, because there was no place to hide even. Anyway, it came from someplace. And it pulls us over. Not the other 2 cars, but we pulled us over. So here we are in this bright lipstick red sports Corvette. And so I know that when he saw these 2 little ladies in this car, he expected to see 2 young kids just really rubbing up on this car. And so he gets out his book to write me the ticket. Oh, no. So I told him, I said, "Officer," I said, "I absolutely have had a terrible day. I said, I couldn't possibly afford to have a ticket." I said, "I just couldn't." Well, anyway, that sweet man said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you obey the speed limit all the way to where this testing grounds are," he said, "I won't give you a ticket." He said, "I'm taking you on your word now." He said, "that you'll obey the law." I said, "Okay." I said, "Man," I said, "I will love you forever." And so we got there too late at night over in Arizona to take it over to the racetrack. And so we stayed at Bill's all night. Zelf had a niece that had only a few weeks away, so she stayed there, and I stayed at Bill's. We arrived at Bill's, and I arrived at Bill's. He had dropped her off. There's all Bill's 3 boys, and their boyfriends out here playing basketball on the driveway. Well, you could imagine, these were teenagers. I drive up in this absolutely gorgeous car. I mean, their eyes just about pop out. So they all come over, and they come in the car. So I said, I let all the kids in the car and feel it and look. But Greg, Bill's oldest son, had just started working at a pizza parlor. And his boss bought a new car. And he thought, "Oh, this car is just the best at everything ever was." So Greg says, "Come on," he said, "we drive over." He said, "Where I work," he says, "and show them this car." So anyway, so I said, "Okay," so I let him drive this car. He was in seventh heaven. So he parks out right in front of the shop. And he goes in and asks his boss if he'd like to come out and see his new car. And anyway, the boss comes out and sees this car, He says, whoa, where did you get that, So anyway, so then we took it back. And so Bill took all the kids and took it for rides in this car. And I thought to myself, what had happened to that car? Can you imagine what would have happened to me? So the next morning, we went out and dropped it off at the proving grounds. And then picked up 2 more cars that were there and drove them home. And so that was a fun trip. We had lots of fun trips. It just really fun. So, but anyway, I started working when most people were retiring, and worked for 2 years. And then finally the company was sold, and so they had to say, it was like they were firing us because we were selling the company. So then I got to collect unemployment insurance, and so I have to call in to see whether I had a new job. I said, "Do you really think they're going to hire a driver who's 75 years old?" So anyway, I collected my unemployment insurance.
Then they finally decide, I don't think you're going to get another job.
That's right. They gave up on me.
For dropping your benefits. You can take Social Security.
Oh, me. So then when I finally old enough to get Social Security, you could take 62, but you lost about 20% of your payment. Or otherwise, if you worked until you were 65, then you got the whole thing. I thought, gee, I could be dead in 3 years. And so I thought, so anyway, I applied for it when I was 62. It wasn't much. But anyway, so all these years I've been getting Social Security, and I'm not knocking it. I mean, it's great.
Well, you paid in lots of years.
Yeah, I did pay in lots of years. So I say, are you a senior citizen, I said, take one look, you can see I'm a senior. They're not cards, so to speak.
So, then going back to your folks, so your dad, you helped him in the office for a while?
Yeah, I worked for him for a couple of years.
And then he decided to retire.
Yeah.
How long was he retired before he died?
Oh, I don't know. He must have been retired for at least 5 years. He used to drive my mother crazy.
Did he do anything after he retired?
No, just told my mother how to run the house. She'd say, Will, I've been doing this for 100 years. I know how to do it. I know.
Now, you were Relief Society president for a while?
Oh, yeah.
How did you help her?
Just like you do. There was always something to do. There was always something to do. She lived in the Studio City ward. Oh, that reminds me, too, about building chapels. When Daddy and I were first married, we lived in Stockton, and they were building the first chapel in Stockton. And so that's how we spent our time. We'd go over after he'd get home from the base, and we'd go over and work on the chapel. So that first chapel we helped build. And then, while he was overseas, they were building a new chapel at Studio City ward where my mother and dad lived. And so the whole time he was gone, I was working over at helping build that one. And then when we built our Sherman Oaks ward, of course he was home, and our kids would go over and help pick up stuff and clean up things. And we'd all go. But Zelf and I, and 4 this is before we started driving, just before we started driving, we'd go over every morning and get there about 9 o'clock. We had our work clothes on, and we sanded and we scraped. And for months, we went over and helped build our chapel. So now, all these years later, I'm still in that same chapel, beautiful chapel, and I sit there and look at that wall. I think, man, I worked on that wall, great between those bricks, and it's just a fun feeling to sit there and think that you helped build that building.
It makes you take care of it better, huh?
It makes me make other people take care of it better too. Kids did something wrong, I say, knock it off.
So Pa wasn't a member of the church when you first met him.
No.
He joined before you were.
But I didn't even know he was going to even join the church, because I didn't want him to join the church with me. And so one time he said, would you come to baptism? I said, baptism? Where are you going to get baptized? What are you doing? And so he had a friend that of course, he knew I was a member of the church, and so he played basketball with this friend. And so anyway, so the friend, I guess, decided to have him, had him join the church. And so that's how I found out to join the church. So anyway, so he was a member of the church when we got.
So most of your married life in the Sherman Oaks ward?
Yeah.
All that time?
It was just made in the ward. They had divided the Van Nuys ward. And so we were members from right at the beginning of that, the Sherman Oaks ward. So all these years we've been members of the Sherman Oaks ward. When I'm in church now, I look up and I see in my mind's eye, I see Rich up to the sacrament table and I see Bill up at the sacrament table. And Bill was the water man. He always called he was the water man. He liked to bless the water. Rick blessed both of them, but Bill liked to do the water. And Nanette, I don't know how to say this. And anyway, so Arcus and our boys both went on missions from the Sherman Oaks ward. And it's just a wonderful ward. I just love being in that ward.
Great. And you were a primary teacher for how long? I
was a primary teacher. I can't remember whether it was 15 years or 20 years. And I got a little diamond in. I'd been in for so long.
And that pretty plate.
Yeah, that pretty plate. And then I wrote a column for the paper called Happenings. And everybody liked that. That was just telling me what everybody was doing. At that time, I knew everybody in the ward. So I knew everything that was happening. And people liked the column. I enjoyed writing it. Well, now we have such a transient ward. I have no idea what anybody's doing. I don't know what I'm doing. So several years ago, they wanted me to start again. I said, I wouldn't have anything to say. I said, because I don't know what I'm doing or what's happening. But for the years that I wrote that, you could actually, it's a history of the ward. Because who was put in, who was put out, who went on a trip, who had babies, who told everything about everybody. It's really fun.
That's why everybody wanted.
Well, yeah, because they wanted to see what was going on and what was happening. Fun. So, but that was several years that I wrote that column. And then I've been president of the gospel doctrine class for 30 years. And it's like if you're on the Supreme Court bench, it's for life. And so, I don't know, I guess I'll have it. I used to welcome new families, and now I'm welcoming their kids and their grandkids. So I don't know, I guess maybe it's that I've got.
I don't think so.
And then I'm also in charge of getting the missionaries dinner appointments.
And you were librarian for quite a while.
Then I was librarian for a long time too. And so I don't know, everybody's been active. And I'm so glad that all my children are active and that they're doing the things that they do. And my kids so far have been married in the temple, and they're wonderful companions that they found. And I have no complaints.
Now, when Pa was the Explorer Advisor for a while, and every year it seemed went to Cusharam.
And he would take a whole, well, we'd both go, I'd go, and we'd go to Cusharam and there'd usually be 2 carloads of kids. They would go, and we'd drop them off. It was a place in Utah. And I had visions of it being kind of in a forest with trees over and everything. And the first time we went, there's not a tree in sight. All the kids had more fun up there. They went water, they went boating, and they went, I don't know what all they did. Rich, we'd drop him off, and lots of times he got to stay.
Now, when you started going to Lake, how did you decide to go there? We had a lot of years that we spent there in the summer.
We did spend a lot of time there in the summer. The kids, well, they were all into water skiing. And
before that, you'd gone to Hansen Dam. That's where.
Yeah, and if you can imagine Hansen Dam, learning to ski at Hansen Dam, I mean, you take your life in your hands. There's a million boats. It's just a little place. Everybody's going like crazy. But that's where the kids learned how to water ski. And then when we started going to Lake Isabella, first of all, for several years, we lived in tents. We camped. And they were up a notch, and we rented this acre house, and we thought we were really living it up then. And the kids would take a friend along besides our kids, and that was a great place to work. And I always think, when I ever think of that, I think of Bill's friend John Dronek. He would tell you how good he was. We thought, oh, well, that's a bunch of baloney. he was even better than he told you he was. He could ski and be about 3 inches from the water on his side. He was fantastic. And I still hear from him after all these years. He calls me to check what I'm doing.
I'm surprised that little boat could get him. We had to shore start to get him.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, and then we finally got up to what, a 10 horsepower motor?
We had a 35 to 65.
Oh, we were really living by then.
Yeah.
I mean, we started out with this 2.5. Oh, that boat. This one, but we got after home for the service, and it was a wooden boat, and I don't know where he could have possibly found this boat. I mean, it should have been discarded when he got it. He must have put 5,000 screws, metal, with brass screws, in this boat, holding it together. And he thought that boat was great. And we went down Balboa. Well, if you know anything about Balboa, it's really first class. Gorgeous big yachts. I mean, big, beautiful boats. And we take this awful looking boat with our 2.5 horsepower, and we go boating down here in Balboa. Oh my gosh. But even though we finally got up to our glass bar boat, and we really thought we were cooking. That's when we finally got up to the 65. But I don't know.
So how many years did we go there? Like 10?
I bet we went there nearly 10.
And the first week of school was out?
First week of school was out, because otherwise it got too hot. It was actually right up in the middle of the desert. It's hot there. But beautiful ski water. It's a man-made lake. It's artificially, but it's big, and it's fun.
I remember at the boat ramp, it would always have a sign and say how many people drowned that year.
Oh, that's right. Well, that was, and then also on the river going up.
Kern
River. And people thought it was just a little
gentle stream.
Little stream. Well, it wasn't. And they would lose several people in that river. It was just very wide. But people just didn't realize how dangerous it was. But there was a sign saying how many people had lost their lives in that river, and there were a lot of them. But that was the river. That's where they really most of the people. Like where we went, they didn't seem to lose as many in the lake as they did in the river. But this river is the one that made the lake. But
so then, when I go back, I can just barely remember when you got. What car did you drive before you had the orange Mustang, the '70 Mustang?
Well, that's when we had the little blue Mustang.
Oh, for Bill.
For Bill. We bought this.
Did you ever drive that?
Oh yeah, we drove it quite a lot. But we got this Mustang, and it was really one of the very first Mustangs that came out. And they're an antique car now. I mean, they're very highly thought of. Anyway, your dad was doing some painting for a lady. She had bought this Mustang for her grandson. Well, anyway, he got in trouble, and with the law, and there was some kind of a hidden box underneath his car somewhere or other that he had a gun in. That's his kid, and so anyway, so the grandma took the car away from. Well, I guess he went to jail, and so she had this car. So it was practically brand new. Had very little mileage on it, and so I think we bought it, and I think we paid $1,800 for it, which was a real good buy. Well, I used it, and then Bill came along, and he got home from his mission, and he ran the wheels off of going up to see his girlfriend up in Valencia. And so this one time, I had a wreck, and it was because his girlfriend's always had to sit over practically on his lap when So they said that he'd had a wreck. Luckily, neither one of them got hurt. I didn't even ask how they were. I said, did the car get wrecked? And so luckily it wasn't very much. It didn't about. It could have been real serious. So the gal, she chased him. I thought he was going to finally get him, but luckily she didn't. And he got Debbie instead, which was a good thing. But
so then you had you bought your Mustang, your orange Mustang, the '70 after that.
And we bought that. We only had in all the years, in all the cars we had, we only had 3 new cars in all those years. But we always had a nice car. And we always got a used car that had very, very low mileage and looked like new. And we kept our cars forever. And in fact, the last car I had a Supra, Toyota Supra. But I just loved. I had that car for 20 years, and it looked like new. When I finally, nobody seemed, the family seemed to want it, and I thought, well, I'm going to donate it. So I donated it to a thing and got $3,000 credit off of my income tax because of it. But that's the only car I ever didn't give to one of the family. The kids always ended up with the cars. And they ended up with my orange Mustang. It was a going car. One time Rich and we were going up to Utah. Little desert. I said, I'm going to see how fast this car will go. 110 and a chicken. And I said, I don't think I better go any faster. Well, anyway, for about 6 months, the speedometer didn't work too well. it would kind of wiggle around, and then finally it settled out. It was okay. Oh, that was a good car. But I don't know, we always...
And Pa always had a big car that had a trunk full of stuff.
5,000 pounds of junk in the back. Everything that you'd ever to work on the apartment with. He had a LTD, gold color, yellow I guess it was. And we had a handyman when Tom got sick and he couldn't really do anything much of any anymore. So we had this handyman that I had all the time coming over to the apartments doing something. And so finally, we had 3 cars for 2 of us. And I finally thought, this is stupid. I'm not even working anymore, and there's this car. So I said to the handyman, would you like to have this car? He said, I really can't afford it. I said, I didn't ask you if you'd like to buy it. I said, I asked you if you'd like to have it. He said, you mean you're going to give it to me? I said, yes. I said, I'm going to give it to you. And he was thrilled to death because the car was just not working at all. And so anyway, he took the car, and oh my gosh, he had that car for several years, and he had it polished and he was in sync with him. It was a nice looking car. But when I had to empty the trunk to give him the car, you can't even imagine what I got out of the back of that car. There must have been 5,000 pounds of junk in there. So anyway, but he had the car.
And it rode 4 inches higher.
Yeah, 4 inches higher, right. It got better mileage than the gas, too. But anyway, so now I'm down to 1 car. I had 2 cars for several years. I thought this is kind of...
So Nanette had the Canary.
Yeah.
What we called her. She always names cars, I guess. So Yellow Impala.
That was one of the brand new cars we bought. Well, Nanette was home, and she was working downtown. So who drove the car? Nanette. She goes out every morning with her new car and goes downtown to work. Yeah, she worked for that.
RD
Sportswear. They really liked her. They took her to New York twice on their big buying. She was the model for all of their clothes. Yeah, that was a good job. That was a good job. So a lot of strange, exciting, interesting things happen all the years you live.
So for activities, sometimes I went shooting.
Oh yeah, Daddy would take you.
Going like that. He used to be, I guess, a hunter when... Did he hunt much after you were married?
Oh, we didn't go. This time, we went up to Big Bear to hunt duck in the wintertime. And he had these great big old dogs. His dad did. He had these...
You never had a dog?
Well, we had a dog for about 5 minutes. Your dad comes home and he has this fancy dog that he had paid, I don't know, about $100 for it. That was a fortune. We didn't only have $100 at the time. And I said, what? And here comes his dog in. He jumps off the litter and he goes tearing through the house 80 miles an hour. I have 2 little kids. I have Bill and Nanette. And so I said, what's with the dog? Well, his dad thought we should have a dog. I said, what? You take his dog, your father, and tell me he needs a dog, and I want the $100 that you paid for the dog. I said, you better talk to me about having a dog with these 2 little kids. So that was how long we had a dog. That was how long we had the dog. But we went to folks' house when the kids were little, crawling on the floor. Well, at that time, they didn't have a vacuum, and these 2 long dogs they had. The mat of hair on his floor. So now when we were growing up, we had a little dog. For years we had this little dog. A little Boston Terrier. But he was like one of the family, but he was a little dog. But these are great big old dogs. And anyway, that was the end of the dogs.
So he never went hunting, really. I know his dad used to go shoot rabbits all the time, and
They went duck hunting. No, they went hunting for quite a few years after we got married. So they would go forever. They had to go forever to go. And then they'd for dove hunting. They'd come home, and these doves, are about this big, when they're cleaned. And my dad would say, "You mean to say they spent all day long hunting those little doves? Only one bite on each dove." Anyway, they went duck hunting, but they did that for a long time. And then when we went duck hunting, we went out, he and his mother and dad and myself, and we went duck hunting. Camping. So then they would shoot the duck, and then they'd come back and give us the duck, and we're supposed to take it and feather them and do all the work. I don't know.
He said, "I'll go hunting, and you can cook them."
You clean the
So that didn't last long. Then we went to target practice shooting instead.
Yeah, that's right. But now you'd have to go 1,000,000 miles to ever find a place to go duck hunting or pheasant hunting or anything.
You had a league.
Oh yeah, Bill played Little League. Bill had to have a paper route. And he'd have to, when the papers would come in to get ready for him to give them that night, as soon as they'd get there, I'd hurry up and fold the papers and get them ready so he'd be ready to go when he got home. So then on his bike, he'd have to deliver these papers. And then you had to collect your own money. It isn't like they do now, they just charge you and put it on your credit card. So you'd have to go and try to get this 25 cents, whatever it was, from these people. Well, this went on for a couple of years. And I finally decided to heck with that. You make about 5 cents. And I thought, I'm working too hard for this money. So anyway, he was thrilled to death when he didn't have to deliver the papers anymore. Well, so here comes Little League. So when he's about 8 years old, I started him on Little League. And he was a good ball player.
Did he want to play?
Not particularly. So I was tying him up for Little League. And he was great in shortstop, first base, and pitching. Really good. As a batter, he was terrible. He was afraid he was going to get hit. He'd close his eyes when the ball would come. So he could pretty well count on an out when he got up. He hated playing. So anyway, then when I had Rich, 7 years later, I'd had enough of the paper. We had to do the paper route. And he didn't have to play Little League. Bill says, "How come Rich didn't have to play Little League?" I says, "I was too old." I says, "I wasn't up to it." Rich got off easy. Didn't have to. And then Rich, he says, "Sure, he's spoiled. Dad builds a dark room for him." Oh, sure. And then when he went away to college, we bought him a brand new car. Oh.
We had some good times on a mini bike.
Oh my gosh, that was fun.
Where we go up Santa Paula?
Yeah, it's up there somewhere. Yeah, Santa Paula.
We throw that in the trunk of the car.
Yeah, we'd throw this just a little mini bike. Anyway, and then his cousin, Warner, we were babysitting him a lot of the time, and so he would go with us once in a while. But Rich had a great time on his little mini bike. And then we had a little, what's the name of that little car we had?
Oh, the Metro?
Oh, the Metro. This little Metro looked
we skipped that car.
This Metro was the funniest little car you've ever seen in your life. It was turquoise color. And then it had the wildest upholstery on the inside you've ever seen in your lifetime. Well, Bill and Dad had to drive that car. And so one time, Bill was driving it around the block, and he ran into a car on the street in back of us. And so he did. If you'd see this car, you'd have to see it to appreciate it, because it was a little tiny thing. Well, anyway, so he had to get it home because we couldn't, whether the tire was flat, I've forgotten what happened to it, but something. So he took his skateboard and his boyfriend, and they went around the street, and they put the car on this skateboard and brought it around the corner and brought it home.
Now, he also used to drive that around the block and shoot crows out of the...
I don't know, some of the things I found out later.
Put them in the freezer.
Oh, this one time I opened the freezer, and here's this big black crow in the freezer. And then Bill was always getting in trouble, and I was always giving him a rough time. And then I found out that it really wasn't his fault, like he tried to tell me. It was Rich.
Oh,
Rich
no,
would
that
just
couldn't be.
antagonize him. And then, but, oh no, Rich can do no harm. And then I finally, after several years, got wise that it wasn't all Bill's fault.
Well, it was equal.
Yeah, it was equal.
So then, I guess Pop built a dark room after I
Yeah.
got a camera when I was like 12
Yeah.
and started taking pictures then with Ice Hadlock.
Yeah,
And we built that back there. That was a great thing.
that was great.
We had a good time doing that. And then, of course, a lot of our time was spent cutting lawns.
Oh yeah, we had the trailer.
Now, we also had Mom's lawn.
We did everything for my mom.
Tell us about your work over there. I don't remember her ever working in the yard, but I remember us working in the
well,
yard.
she had a stroke, but I mean, she wasn't able to. My mother was a hard worker. She was a hard worker. But we'd go over to my mother, and she had a gardener that would cut the lawn most of the time. But he didn't do the trimming or any of all these other things that
Weeding.
Yeah, weeding. And she liked her yard to look really nice, just like we all like our yards to look. Well, that's the way she liked hers to look. And so she'd have these. She wants something trimmed up in this great big tree she had. So she'd have either Bill or Richard, whoever happened to be at that time, just a little farther, just on that branch, out a little bit further, and they're hanging by the toenails practically while they're doing this. But we used to go there all the time and work for, do her work. But then she was really good to us. We didn't mind, but we went over there faithfully and worked. But it was always, a little bit further, just a little bit further.
Then she had that, what was that yard you called that was beyond the grass? The utility yard?
Yeah, utility yard. She had a white picket fence. This yard was real deep. It was 175 feet deep. So about 50 feet from the lot. She had this white picket fence, looked real pretty. Then on the other side, they had a big fig tree, and they had an apricot tree, and what other kind of
And
tree?
there's an orange tree, but I don't remember getting any good
No,
oranges.
no
off it.
good oranges. And the apricot tree, we never got any apricots here. But the fig tree, oh, beautiful figs. Oh my gosh, they were good. But that was the utility yard. And then we'd have to go down and weed that because the weeds grow. And then, she always had something to do, let's put it that way. We worked hard around Grandma's house.
And then, of course, we had to cut all the lawns at all the departments. So we had that trailer with the stuff in it.
That's right. And now, did you ever have any, you didn't have any yards that you ever had to do other than ours, did
Just the
you?
apartments.
Well, when Bill was up, we still had this trailer with a mower and the edger and the whole thing. But he couldn't drive yet. So Daddy would take him to where he was going to work and drop off the trailer, and then Bill would he had about 5 yards. And so he would do those yards. Then Daddy would have to go back over and bring the trailer and Bill home. Well, then finally he got old enough that he could drive himself, and so he would take us. But we always had a trailer. Always had a trailer. In fact, how we got the first trailer was, when we were in Idaho, we bought a piano. A friend of ours had this piano, and she had this, it was an upright console, real nice piano. So anyway, so we bought the piano, but we had no way to get it home. So we had to buy a trailer. So we bought the trailer so we could bring the piano to California. So that's how we got the trailer. But we had trailers for years, just always hauling something, always hauling something. In fact, we got the oak round table that we have in our den. We bought that in Idaho, so we came home in the trailer.
Now, was it short then, or was it full height?
It was full height, and it was before they were so popular. And I was reading a newspaper, and it said this oak table and was for sale for $20. So boy, that sounds like a deal. So anyway, so we go over to see it, and the man says, "I don't think that's enough money for that table." He said, "I think it should be another $10." I said, I said, "How much did you tell me the table was?" He said, $20. I said, "And did I say I would buy it for $10? He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, then here's your $20. I said, "I'm sure you wouldn't want to go back on your word." So that's all we paid for that beautiful oak table. And not only that, it had 6 leaves to go with it. So it made it into a huge, huge table. But we didn't want it for that. And so we kept the leaves for a long time. And then I don't know why, for some reason, they disappeared. But I wish I had those beautiful oak leaves because they were nice. Anyway, so then Daddy cut it off to the height we wanted it. And
So that's a coffee table.
Coffee table. So we've had it forever. So we really enjoyed that table. And then I needed some pinky shears. And I bought those for the ad in the paper.
They had those advertised in the... Wow.
I got those up in Stockton. So, in fact, best beauty rest mattress that we had forever that was such an absolute heaven to sleep on, I got that through an ad in the paper. And it was just practically like new, and I think I paid $50 for the set. So there's nearly everything I own, there is a story to it. I have no desire just to go out and buy something. I like to it.
Now we were talking about your mom's yard. She always had azaleas.
Oh, azaleas.
I guess she had roses too. Is that what started roses and azaleas?
No, what started me on roses, when I was a little tiny girl, my grandmother in Utah, in Salt Lake, had a rose garden. And even though I was that young, I was just fascinated by this rose garden. And it was just a rose garden. It was an area about this large, and it was just all roses. And I just never thought anything so beautiful as roses. So that's really where I got the roses, not from my mother, but from my grandmother. But the azaleas, I really got started on those because my mother had those beautiful azaleas.
Uh-huh.
Then you remember when I used to have had on the front porch, and they were just solid, these gorgeous.
Yeah.
But see, then they got a lot of sun because we didn't have the big trees. But they wouldn't do well at all because they don't get sun.
And you still love roses.
Oh, I love roses.
Tell us how you started growing tomatoes. You have a...
Well, I don't know how I accept it. The very first tomato I ever tasted was when we first came to California, when I was 6 years old. And the aunt of mine that we stayed with for a few days before we rented the house near them on Marymount Avenue, they had tomato. It was in the fall, and the tomatoes were still, growing good. And they had tomatoes, and a patch of tomatoes out by their yard. And you'd go out and you'd pick one of these tomatoes, and they were warm from the sun, and you'd take a salt shaker with you, and you'd click on the tomato, so you'd salt it because the salt was on, and then you'd eat these tomatoes. And I thought, oh my, this is the best I've tasted in my lifetime. And that's how I got liking tomatoes. Well, I never grew any tomatoes for the next 50 years. And I don't even still know how I started growing the tomatoes, but next door to where we live, there's a spot about 3 feet, not even 3 feet, maybe 2 feet wide, dirt on the other side of this chain link fence. Well, the people that live there...
And that used to all be hedges.
Well, that was out in front. That wasn't hedged back there. It was just from the front of their house to them. So there was no hedges there. Anyway, and so it was always just kind of neat because they didn't ever come to that side of the house.
I never see it.
And so, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago maybe? Has it been that long?
Maybe 15.
I don't think it's been that long. Anyway, whatever it is, this one time I decided, that would be a perfect spot for tomatoes because it gets full sun all day long. So I went and asked my neighbors, I said, would you mind if I used your spot over here, this dirt that's nothing but weeds all the time, I said, and let me grow tomatoes there, plant tomatoes. Oh, that'll be fine. So we went over and we cleaned it up, and I went and bought little tomato plants, and it's just a perfect spot for tomatoes. So I do the whole, there's supposed to be 50 feet that I planted tomatoes, maybe 15 or 20, plants, which are a lot of tomatoes. And so one girlfriend, she says, why do you plant some tomatoes? She says, you can't eat all those tomatoes. I said, well, of course I can't eat those tomatoes. I said, I grow them for my friends and my neighbors. I said, it's just fun to grow them. So anyway, that house has been sold 3 different times since I started using that ground. And the last one that bought it, they were told, now, you'll marry you spot right there for tomatoes.
So don't fiddle with it.
So don't fiddle with it. And they used to lock the gate. Well, they don't lock the gate anymore because I can't get in to take care of my tomatoes. And of course, I can water them perfectly from my side because it's,
just a chain link fence.
Chain link fence. So anyway, I grow tomatoes and share with all my friends.
Now lately you've been growing zinnias.
Oh yeah, I've done that. Oh, that's been about the last 5 years. This friend of mine gave me a package that she got for 10 cents. They were having a big sale. I planted the zinnias, and I love them. So colorful, so pretty. And I have some barrels, 4 barrels, right out by my back door on the garage, on the cement by the garage. So anyway, so they were so nice, and so I saved some seeds, and for next year. So next year, now for 5 years or so, I'm using the same package of 10 cent seeds that I saved the seeds from, and I grow so many plants that I dig some up and give it to a friend who gave me the 10 cent zinnias, and she has zinnia plants. And then there's a couple other friends I give them seeds, and last year I gave Bill seeds, and he planted seeds. These are still from our seeds. So, like I say, there has to be a story to everything. Nothing just happens because it...
Now, your kids moved away.
I told my kids, now I don't want you dating anybody that lives any farther than Glendale. So that they'll come home, they'll be close to me. Well, Nanette went to BYU. She meets David. And they'll end up, he's a Colorado boy. And but the first job they got, they went to Boise, Idaho. Then they went to Bountiful, Utah. And then to Colorado. Then they went back to someplace else. Then they went back to Colorado again. Well, on the third time to stay to Colorado, they stayed, so they've been there for years. So that's where her kids have all grown up in Colorado. Well, then Bill, he goes and he meets a girl from Provo.
He was in BYU also.
He was BYU, and like I told, don't get mixed up with anybody except from California. Okay, so he gets mixed up. Not mixed up. Anyway, he and Debbie get married. She's a Provo girl. Okay, so then his first job, though, is up in Northern California. So they go up there and he buys a house that she has not even seen. And, well, this is when their third child was born, though. Before that, he and Debbie lived at some apartments her folks owned.
Seville.
They're
managers.
They managed the apartment. And luckily, Dad, well, first of all, her dad thought he was a California boy, and don't have anything to do with California boy. And his hair was a little on the long side, and her dad was bald.
And in the military.
In the military. So he was giving me a rough time about my son and his hair. So I said to the boss, which Bill calls him the boss, the colonel, because he was a full-time military man, and so he was colonel. And so anyway, so I told him, I said, well, I don't have those that do. and so anyway, after that, he and I got along great. But he thought Bill, until his dying day a few years ago, was absolutely wonderful, because Bill could do everything and he could do everything, and they worked together on the apartments and did this and did that. So it worked out great. So they finally liked their California boy. And then Rich.
Oh wait, so he went with Lincoln National Insurance up to Pittsburgh, California.
Yeah, And he's been with them all his married life, for 30 years.
Did he transfer or just decided to go down to Mesa? How did he get in Mesa?
No, he got transferred down there. He got a chance to go down there.
Oh, okay.
And that's how he went to Mesa.
So and they've been in Mesa for 30 years or something.
Yeah, just about. So all of their kids have been raised in Mesa, Arizona.
Although 3 were born in...
One was 2, no, the last one. No, just the girls were born in Mesa. The boys were all born in 2 in California and 1 in...
Provo.
2 in Provo, yeah, 2 in Provo. All 3 of them were born in Provo. Because when they went to Pittsburgh after Bill graduated, little Rich was only a couple of weeks old. And all of this happened when my mother passed away.
So that's...
and you were on your mission.
I was on my mission. That's how he ended up with some of her furniture, because she had just died.
My mother had just passed away, so she had this whole house full of furniture. And so it worked out perfect. I hired a great big van, and they got the dining room set, and they got living room set, and they got all kinds of things to furnish their house.
Right.
And so the Daddy and I drove this great big van up to Pittsburgh. And I said, Debbie had never seen this house. And she had this brand new baby and these 2 other little kids. And so her mother went on over and put all the dishes in the cupboard and got everything ready. So when Debbie arrives, everything's in the house. The house is all set up for Debbie.
Great.
And so it was great. So they were up there several years, and then they moved. Then they got transferred, or he took the job with the same company down in Mesa, and that worked out real well.
And in the meantime, Bill had been on a mission to Australia.
And then he came back and went to the Y, and then for a couple of summers he worked up at Yellowstone driving a big bus, a big tour bus, and he had fun doing that. You remember when we went up to see him?
Yeah.
He took that lady on the side trip, and so she could get to her place, and it was off the beaten track. And the other fellows would say, how come he gets so many tips? He said, he makes all kinds of money. And I thought, well, it must be the gift to gab and what, I don't know what. Anyway, he had a good time. And then he told me on us that I wasn't to feed the bears or something.
He said, I brought my sack of bread.
Yeah. And so then Rich is on his mission. And he gets home. And went to the very first group of full-time missionaries in Utah. And at that time, there was only one mission in Utah from top to bottom. And he spent one summer at Zion National Park. And so he liked it so well in the south. Well, he bought a home actually when he was going to school up in Provo. But he didn't want to live in Provo. He said it was too cold. So he and Carolyn sold that house. And you had what, just Tyler at that time?
Tyler and Melissa.
You had the two babies at that time. Well, anyway, so then they moved down south to southern Utah. And so they've lived in Utah, southern Utah, nearly all their married life. So you see how my kids listen to what I said to about not marrying anybody that didn't live in Glendale. Well, they didn't listen to me. They all married one from New Mexico, one from Provo, the other from Colorado. But it's worked out fine. And
so they all ended up with the grandkids.
So they all ended
your
up
grandkids, their kids.
With my grandkids. And so when all of these kids were little, I spent half of my time babysitting. I'd get on the plane and I'd go to Colorado. I'd get on the plane or drive up to Rich's, babysit their kids, and take care of Bill's kids.
Minnesota.
And
Denver, Mesa.
I must have been 100 trips going and babysitting. So luckily, I said, I want my grandchildren to know me. Whether they like me or not, I want them to know me. And so we made many trips to see our grandkids and our children. And it's just been wonderful. Because I've known these grandkids intimately all their lives. And it's really nice. And I'm real proud of all of them. They turned out great. They really turned out great. But the whole thing of this is the church. If it wasn't for the church, we'd have had a completely different life. And our activities are really always church oriented. And and then when you get together, everybody has something to talk about, because this one has a job, the church has a job. Everybody's in job. And now I have a sister who has 4 daughters, beautiful women daughters. No sons. And her husband always wanted a son because he was in the service and he thought nobody had anything but sons. Well, anyway, he didn't get one son. He got 4 daughters, lovely daughters. And he never joined the church. My sister's always been active in the church, and which I have to really give her for, not having any support from her husband. None of her daughters married into the church, and like I say, they all married real nice men and were lovely people. But when we get together, we really don't have anything to talk about, because we just don't have that connection.
Yeah.
And it's too bad. So, anyway, but the church really is the foundation of our family. It's just been wonderful. And so all the grandchildren have married in the temple, and all 3 of the kids married in the temple. And so and all the years that Tom and I didn't get, well, there was no temple in Los Angeles when we got married during the war years, and we'd had to go to Arizona or Salt Lake, and so anyway, we just didn't ever seem to get around to it. So finally, well, after all, we had all 3 children, and Bishop Emery said, Mary, he said, this is just absolutely ridiculous that you and Tom aren't married in the temple. He said, there's not one reason that you shouldn't have been married. He said, so let's put an end to this. And so we said, fine. And so we went to the temple, and Zelf had a big wedding party for us afterwards, and which was really great. So I guess people just have to put like when Tom called and says, make arrangements to get married, I may never have gotten married. I may never have gotten married in the temple. Unless someone finally says, you better get with it.
Great story. We'll take a break.
Yeah, that's it. We need a break.
Okay, Mom, now it's the next day, day after Thanksgiving. It's the 25th of November, 2005. We're still in Hurricane. We're picking up. We talked about the church. Can you tell us how the first people in your family joined the church?
My dad's family joined the church in Norway, in Oslo, Norway. And his mother opened the door to missionaries, and she was taught the gospel. And it was through the missionaries that they joined the church, and then they came to America.
Do you have any idea about when this was?
It was right soon after the church was organized, so it was early.
So some of the first missionaries who were sent out to Scandinavian countries.
Yes, and they had good success in the Scandinavian countries. And luckily, my great-great-grandmother heard the message and joined the church.
Now, did she immediately after she joined the church say, okay, we're headed to the States?
Which nearly all of the new converts did. They seemed to feel that the thing to do was to go to America and join the other saints.
Okay.
And then on my mother's side, they joined the church in England. And it was the same thing. The missionaries got in touch with them, and they also joined the church very early in the organization of the church, and they came to the country. Both groups came with the pioneers across the trek to Utah. I don't know exactly about my mother's family, where the route they took, but I know that my dad's family, they landed up in Nauvoo, and they were a few of the, not too many, that were able to take out endowments in the Nauvoo temple before they had to leave Nauvoo.
Okay, we were just in Nauvoo, and from there the Mormon battalion was formed. And
my great-grandfather, David Pinckney Rainey, was one of those that volunteered for the Mormon battalion, and he made the trek to San Diego. And from San Diego they also came up to Los Angeles, and down in the city of Los Angeles is the monument to the Mormon battalion. And then he went back, made the trek back home, and picked up his wife and family, and then they came. And the first place they were that they lived in was, I guess, kind of a dugout in Provo, Utah.
Huh. And then he was later, I think, the bishop in Salem.
That's what the records show that he was.
Yeah.
And that family, my dad's family, my dad was born in Richfield, Utah, up near Logan. And then they
Richfield or Richmond?
Richmond, because it's near Logan.
Yeah.
And then when he was quite young, they went to Wyoming. And his dad had 9 children by my grandmother Mary Olson Rainey, and my dad was one of the 2 sons. He was the oldest son. They lost 2 children, so there were 7 children that lived to maturity. They had...
And Mary wasn't his first wife?
No, Mary was his first wife.
Oh, Mary, okay.
My grandmother was his first wife. Then he took another wife. It was during polygamous days. And then he had to go to Canada, which a lot of polygamists had to do or they would be arrested. And he had, I don't know, several children, not a lot of children, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know exactly how many. I look up on the record. And they lived up in Canada. So that left my grandmother with all of those children down in Wyoming, and I guess this one winter they just about froze to death and starved to death while he was up with his other family. That was not a happy thing, but unfortunately my grandmother passed away when she was in her early 40s from appendicitis, ruptured appendix. And so she left my Uncle Ralph. He was the other son, and he was just a young child, and so he married a 3rd time because his other wife divorced him. She didn't want to take care of any of his children.
The one in Canada?
The one in Canada divorced him. And so then he married again, and evidently this woman was really quite nice. And she really raised my Uncle Ralph. My dad finally left home when he left home when his died, because things were just so rough and miserable at home. And he went to live with an aunt that lived in Logan. And when he was on the farm, they had all these cows to milk every day because they were in the cheese business. And he worked so hard that he never grew. He was really quite short, I guess, until he left home and didn't have to work so hard all the time. He grew, and he grew, and he was nearly 6 foot tall when he finally reached his maturity. And he went on a mission, and then earlier in this tape, then he came home from his mission, and my mother met one another, and they were married. And they were married within just a couple of months of their 50th wedding anniversary. So unfortunately, they didn't ever quite make their 50th anniversary.
You mean when they passed away?
Well, my dad passed away. My mother lived 16 years after my dad died. And she lived in her home until the day she passed away.
And
with the help of my family.
And she died of a stroke.
She had a stroke 10 years before she passed away, but luckily it didn't affect her mind. She was able to walk. She was no longer able to drive the car, and that was the worst thing that ever happened to her because she was a very independent woman. But we luckily lived nearby, and so it was really not that much of a hardship because we went over practically every day. We did her shopping for her, but she did her own cooking and more or less kept up her house. And she was independent when she died.
Now, I was kind of too young to remember what the circumstances were around your father's dying.
Well, her dad died of colon cancer.
Your dad?
Oh, my dad. He had a heart attack, and he had never had we never knew he ever had he had arthritis in his hips, and he had to walk with a cane the last several years of his life. But luckily, even though he had this arthritis in his hips, it was never really painful, but he had to walk with a cane.
So nobody knew
We never had any indication that he ever had any heart problems. But we think that because of the shots he had of for his arthritis. Cortisone shots. We think maybe that must have had something to do with his heart. We don't know. But anyway, one night, he just had a heart attack and died. And for some reason or other, he and my mother always slept together in the same bedroom, but they had a second bedroom that had twin beds. And that night, for some reason, we don't know, but he decided that he just didn't feel too good or something, and he slept in the other room. And so when he had this heart attack, he actually fell out of bed, and it was so far on the other end of the house, my mother really didn't even hear him until she got up, so he could have been dead, maybe a couple of hours before she found him. So she called me. We lived about 5 minutes on the freeway to get there. So she called me up, Mary, I think your father's dead. I said, what do you mean you think? I mean, he either is or he isn't. She said, well, he is. And so she had called, and I said, well, we'd be there in 5 minutes. So we hurried up and put on our clothes and jumped in the car, and we're over there. And then, of course, her took him to be buried.
Now, right before your mom died, there was some kind of unusual things.
It was very unusual. My mother actually passed away on Easter morning. But before this, well, I shouldn't say, she had her stroke, her final stroke. She only had 2 strokes, and this was the second one. But it was on Easter morning. But the family was going to get together and have Easter dinner at my mother's home. And she says, Mary, she said, if you don't mind, she said, would you just you cook the meal and bring it over, and we'll do it Saturday because Francis Rainey can't come Sunday, and it will just be easier if we have it Saturday. I said, that's fine. So I cooked the dinner, and then we took it over to my mother's, and Francis Rainey was there with her 3 children, and my sister-in-law, Helen, was there, and I was there, and Tom, and I guess our kids. Were you still there? You must have been.
I was on a mission.
Oh yeah, you were on a mission. So we had no children at home, so it was just Tom and myself. And so anyway, So we had this wonderful, wonderful dinner, and everybody had a good time. And so while we were there, the phone rang, and it was my son Bill and his third child, Little Rich. We call him Little Rich, although he's not little, but we call him Little Rich because of my Big Rich. And so he called and told my mother about the new arrival. So she got to talk to him all about the new grandson and had a lovely visit with Bill. Okay, so not too long after that, Rich called. Now this is the first time that he had called his mission. And so my mother was quilting a quilt. She calls them the baby blessing quilts because she gave each one of the children a blessing quilt. And they're beautiful satin quilts. They're all hand quilted, and they have lace about 3 inches wide. So she and Rich were discussing what color lace to put on his quilt. And so they had a lovely time visiting. Okay, so then finally we all went home. But Frances, for some reason or other, she decided to stay all night, and which nobody had stayed with my mother all night, I don't think ever, for any reason. But anyways, Frances and her family stayed all night. And I went home, and so then I called up later to tell Mother what a wonderful time we'd all had, hashed over the talk with Rich and the talk with Bill, and just the whole thing. We just had a wonderful conversation. So anyway, so early the next morning, my niece, Frances, heard this thud. And she got up, and my mother was in the bathroom, and she'd had a stroke. And she of course called the ambulance immediately. And she never gained consciousness really after that. She didn't pass away for 3 days later. And so of course my sister came down, and my brother came over, and I was there naturally. So Mother was in St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank. And so we were there, and so we stayed with Mother the whole time, and so I was holding her hand, and all of a sudden she gave this one gasp, kind of, and I could it's the strangest feeling. It was like her soul left her body, and she had this heavenly smile on her face, and it's just, it was wonderful, and she was a wonderful mother, way beyond her time for being modern. She drove one of the first cars in Idaho. Her dad had one of the first cars, and we lived on Eagle Street. It's a great big long block, and actually there are only 3 people on that block that had cars. It was just so early for cars, and everybody didn't have a car, but we had a car. And at that time, when the kids got older, everybody didn't have a car. Everybody used the family car. And so when we'd go to basketball games, my brother would drive the car, and we'd fill it up with our friends, and we'd all go to the basketball game to watch everybody play ball. And my mother really, if anything, and at that time, actually cranked the car, the very first car we had. And you'd go out and you'd get this crank in the front, you'd whirl it around like this, boom, the car would start. And that's the way you'd start your car. There's so many things that have changed in my lifetime. It's just amazing what's happened from the time it's too much to even think about what's happened. And if I'd known I was going to live so long, I would have gotten modern about 10 years ago and learned to use the computer and the pod lot and whatever. But there's so many things. Sometimes think they're speaking in a foreign language. But other than those things, I'm real modern. But when it comes to those, I have to say I'm not doing too well. But I seem to manage without them. Every one of my grandkids, my kids, they all grab their phones and they talk on the phones. And the only time I need a cell phone is when I go to the airport. And so I just ask somebody standing next to me if they'll make a call for me, because everybody has a cell phone. So I guess I really don't need one. So anyway, that's what happened to my mother and my dad.
Yeah.
So luckily, neither one of them were confined to bed, and it had to go through that horrible thing like we had to with Tom, because he had Alzheimer's. And when I look back, he must have really had the first inklings of that about 10 years before he died. but it was very gradual. But the last 3 or 4 years were horrible. They were just horrible. And it was a blessing when he passed away. And really, I thought he was going to last another couple of years, but all of a sudden, up here with Rich, and Rich says, Dad's taking a turn really for the... And he had forgotten how to swallow. And when you forget how to swallow, you don't do too well. And I had one of these living wills, and Rich knew that I didn't want anything done. I didn't want any tubes. I didn't want him fed by intravenous feeding, because he didn't have any idea where he was. He had no quality of life at all.
Tell us how he ended up here.
Well, I will. How Rich said, how did he end up here? Well,
in Hurricane.
In Hurricane. Nearly a year before that, Dana, my granddaughter, was getting married in the temple in Denver. And I had been taking care of Tom 24 hours a day, and I really wasn't feeling good. And the doctor, in fact, wanted me to go to the hospital, because she said, Mary, you really should be in the hospital. I said, well, I really can't, because who's going to take care of Tom? And so I didn't go to the hospital. I just kept taking care of Tom. But anyway, I just really wanted to go to this wedding. And so Rich said, I'll come and take care of Daddy, and you go to Denver. You fly to Denver.
Now, just to back up just a little, there was another wedding before that, and kind of Bill and I had to decide who would go down and take care of Pop.
Oh, that's right. I went to Scott's wedding. I went to Scott's wedding. And so, and that was only a month before, so I had been back. And so, did Bill come and take care of Daddy?
Yeah, he
was.
Oh,
that's the first time he ever knew. He says, gee, Mom, he says, I didn't realize you had so much work to do taking care of Daddy. Because he never was over there doing anything taking care of Daddy. And he thought it was a cinch. And so, boy, he was glad to go home when I got back. Well, anyway, so I flew to Denver. And I got there 3 days before the wedding. And the second day, no, it was, I guess I got, well, anyway, the day of the wedding, at 5:30 in the morning, Nanette said to her husband, David, you've got to take Mother to the hospital. Well, I didn't have any intention of going to the hospital. I knew I didn't feel good. I was going to the wedding no matter what. And so anyway, David came in and he says, Mom, he says, Nanette thinks you should go to the hospital. And for some reason or other, which is not like me, I said, okay. And I got up and I got dressed. We got in the car. We went to the hospital. And luckily, I had this health plan. It was also good in Denver, Secure Horizons. And so I showed my card and they admitted me. And then that afternoon, I guess it was about noon, Nanette and Ryan, not Nanette, Dana and Ryan, came over, and she was all in her wedding gown. They had been to the temple, they had been married and sealed to one another, and so they came to the hospital. And everybody in the hospital, it's a huge big hospital, but everybody knew that this bride and groom had been there, and they were a beautiful bride and groom, and they came in, and I had all the tubes in me from one end to the other, and so I got to see them. And then after that, I don't know exactly when they put me on life support, but it must have been right soon after that. And then I was on life support for 2 weeks, and they never thought I was ever going to make it. But Nanette said, if you knew my mother, she will make it. And so anyway, so after that, so I finally did get off of life support. And then I was in the hospital for I was there for nearly a month. But I kept telling the nurse, I said, my son-in-law David is going to come to 10 o'clock tonight, and he can get me out of here. And well, of course, I had all these tubes in me and everything. And being fed intravenous, I had this big tube down my throat. That's why my voice sounds so funny every once in a while now. And so anyway, so they were kind of worried about actually him coming and getting me out of the hospital, I guess. And so they took and moved my whole bed with all of these tubes and everything down right near the nurse's station so they could keep their eye on me. So anyway, when I got out, I was at Nanette's, and I couldn't walk because I hadn't been out of bed for a month, and so I had to barely take with a walker, and I could only use a few steps, and so I was at Nanette's for nearly a month while she took care of me, and then she had to drive me home. I wasn't even able to fly home again. Well, in the meantime, Rich could see after a few days that I wasn't going to be coming home, and he had to come home. So he brought his dad home with him. And so for about 3 months, he actually lived at Carolyn and Bill's house, and they took care of him. And I will never get over how Carolyn and Rich took care of their dad. She was wonderful. I just can't thank her enough for what she did for him. And then finally they had to put Tom over to the hospital because he needed really more care. And Rich would go over and see him every day and bring him home for a few hours. So he was here 9 months from the time he arrived to the time he passed away. And when Richard called me then, Bill was coming over to visit me, and so the minute he got there, we got in the car and came up to Hurricane. And so I was able to see Tom before he died. And he loved the song Silent Night. And so I guess Carol had sang to him, and Bill and I had left to go home because we thought he might last another couple of weeks. And so Rich called and said, I don't think Dad's going to last another week, right away. And I said, well, Rich, I said, just stay with him then. And so he and Carolyn stayed with him and sang to him and was there with him until he passed away. And then while I was here, we had made all arrangements for his casket, and I had brought his temple clothes, and so then after he passed away, then this mortuary, which is the most fabulous mortuary I've ever seen, took care of everything, and they brought his body down home, and we had the funeral at our chapel in Sherman Oaks. So that's how Daddy ended up in Hurricane. So anyway, that was, let's see, March the 14th, 2002. And so anyway, I'm a widow, I guess, but I don't know. I don't know how you're supposed to feel as a widow, but I don't feel. I think that maybe the reason is he had been ill for the last 2 years and then up here for so long that even though he was home, it was like he wasn't there. So it wasn't like all of a sudden he passed away. He had been passed away for really several years. So
because the real Tom wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, the real Tom wasn't there anymore. So that's the story of Tom.